Hello, and welcome to the Coach's Corner. My name is Jason Flores, and I'm here with the coaches from the Endurance Lab to bring you what's going on this week in the lab. Today, I'm on the line with Taya, Andrea, and Ian today. So we're just going to do a quick round, see what's going on and where everyone's at this week, kind of in their own journey as coaches. So we'll start off with Ian. Ian, what's going on with you today?
Well, I'm in lovely San Diego, California, traveling for work. So no bike, no pool, lots of running. Got in a good almost 18 miles yesterday running, and I should have been in the conference. It was fantastic. Ran along the ocean.
Oh man,
and that's anything prettier.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you know why people say they like to move to California then now?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. It's freezing here. It's horrible. It's like 60 degrees. It's just.
All right, we'll slide on over to Taya, and she could tell us how warm it is in her part of the woods.
We're having a heat wave. I'm not kidding. It was 50 degrees yesterday in Chicago, which is unheard of. Yeah,
it's like shorts and t-shirts for the Midwest.
Oh, people are heading over to the beach. So it's definitely summer weather here. The snow melted, but I'm sure we'll be back in freezing temperatures pretty soon.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I've been having a good week this week of training, a little bit down in intensity because last week was pretty high, but otherwise just really enjoying getting everybody geared up and ready and started with this new lab.
Oh yeah, super exciting. This is the first week of Lab 2, so a lot of things going on, a lot of new writers. I think a good blend between old and new lab writers. We've got a good group going together, so we could definitely talk about that as we go forward. All right, we'll go across the pond over to Andrea. What's going on over there? Andrea, what do you have going on?
You guys are killing me with your weather because I think if it rains anymore here, we're actually going to sail to America.
Hey, so you'll be a little closer.
I had to do an hour 20 treadmill run on Sunday, and I realized how much I hate staring at a cement wall. So on Monday, I went out in the storm, no matter what, running up a mountain. I thought I can't hack training inside. But it's been a really good week with clients and tipping waves training, a lot of swimming. I realized the more you're in the pool, the better it feels each time. So that's been good. You start to feel the water better. And it's Friday. So yeah, everything's good.
Very nice, very nice. All right, we're going to jump straight into the lab. What's going on this week? I'm going to throw it over to Ian, and he's going to introduce kind of our first week here in the lab and what we had going on this week. So Ian, tell us what we had.
Thanks, Jason. So we're still working like we did on the preseason lab on maintaining our core stability. So what we ended with there is what we're going straight into here, because as we start building up our volume and start increasing our load, that core stability is going to be super important, because as you get tired, and I know Andrew's going to hit this a little bit later, as you get tired, you start losing your form. You lose your form, you lose your power, or you cramp up, or you can't quite get what you need out of it. So that's what we're really focused on now is that core stability and that strength that you need to maintain for later on. And then we also have on our multi-sport side, our triathlon add-on this time, we got people getting in and doing their first swims and their first run. So it's a lot of fun right now.
Oh, absolutely. And for those new to the lab, this first week can be a challenging time for you, learning the movements and kind of putting them all together. So take some time before those days that you are doing those strength workouts. Check out the Endurance Lab YouTube channel. Check out all the videos. If you have any questions, post those up beforehand so you get an idea of what you need to do or the different things that you need. There does take a little time to get up to snuff or up, all your equipment ready to make this happen. So at that point, let us know. We've gone through it a couple times.
Yeah, Jason, on that's definitely correct. And if anything, the exercises look daunting or too much, just knock it back a little bit, scale it down, reduce weights, or don't use any kind of weight with it if you have to. It's not about, trying to get the most weight up or the most push-ups that you've ever done in your life the first set. It's just about getting through the exercises, getting through the motions, and getting yourself stronger in the long run.
Absolutely. And we went through a lot of that during the preseason time of people going from not doing any of these movements to doing these movements. So making that change or that kind of slow progression, at least doing them and making those movements, you're going to make those changes that we're looking to have you make during the lab. All right. Next up, we've got a conversation about base work and the different workouts that we've done and what we've got coming up this weekend. We had a very, very, very controversial workout very early on in the lab, Tia. So tell us what we had this week.
So on a calendar for this week, we started with the MAF test, the maximum aerobic fitness test, which everybody had a lot of fun with, and we'll get a little more into that here in a minute. Then we also had a sweet spot variation workout, which is a good workout to begin the week of the lab. It's just enough of sweet spot work without overwhelming the body. And then we had the 5-5-5 strength steps, low cadence. And finally, the tempo to sweet spot build, 2 times 25 minutes, which not super high power there, but constant pressure in terms of maintaining power and increasing it progressively throughout the workout.
Absolutely. So if you didn't get a chance or you haven't come across it, Tia does a great roundup video at the beginning of the week to go through and talk about the goals and the things that you should be thinking about during each of the workouts. So make sure you catch that post in the Endurance Lab forum and that you're going through that almost daily to make sure that things like announcements or questions or just anything across the board are being addressed in your head and you understand what you're getting into as you get through the week. We are there to support you, so whatever you have, head over to the Endurance Lab forum to be able to answer those questions.
Okay,
all right, we're going to jump into
I'm waiting for one of Tea's videos later in the cycle here in the lab that she better just put in her video. What's going through your mind should be don't die.
Don't die.
Survival mode.
Survival mode. Just finished the workout. I feel like a lot of our writers from the last lab, when we got to 20 minutes of SST, were kind of in that mode. We're like, just make it. You can do it. You've done it. You know what I mean? All right. So let's move over to hot topics in the lab. I'm going to start off with a little bit of a chat about an article that was brought up in Training Peaks about the physiology of FTP testing and different protocols. It is an article that was brought up and it talked about the 95% or the 20-minute power test versus just trying to get that FTP, looking at power curves and that sort of thing. But I wanted to shift the conversation, and we were talking a little bit of pre-show about this, is how much do we actually really need our athletes or an athlete to actually test their FTP? A lot of times, especially with the advent of Zwift, we see more and more that people are testing their FTP numerous times a season, when in fact, just taking a short poll with the coaches here, we may only have an athlete do it once or twice a year, and at the most. And a lot of times, if you are being coached, your coach can typically kind of nudge your FTP as we go, and that anxiety that is built in to the testing itself, the quote unquote tapering, and all the stuff that has to do with before and after, we can do without it, and we could actually continue the course. And very, very important for those athletes, especially the triathletes that have got so much on their plate, continuously trying to change their FTP or test their FTP could be very daunting to them. And then on top of that, really, what does an FTP test tell us other than giving us a place to kind of place our flag and to be able to effectively find our zones? But if in fact you were off by 5 one way or the other, I don't think as coaches we find that someone is, grossly off on their improvements because of that. In fact, more so, I think a lot of us are moving more towards a skill-based approach where we are needing to make sure that our riders are getting the skills that they need to do, whether it be low cadence, high cadence, low power at low cadence, and kind of matching those things to be able to match their goals, whether it be kind of a low and steady pace or kind of a spiky type of a hilly road race. So I think more importantly than the FTP test is that we are making sure that you are getting the skills, and that's one thing that the lab builds on. I had a little bit of a dissertation or kind of enlightened moment, not that I wanted to get in the pool or run or swim as Ian would ask, but that during a long SST workout is that the workouts and that the lab prescribes and that are kind of thought process here at the lab is kind of like it has layers. Obviously you have your FTP in the center. You've got your next layer of our ideas of SST, which is the sweet spot area that we kind of work on to make sure that riders are able to recover. And then above that, we've got the skills work, whether it be sprinting, low cadence, high cadence, longer layers of SST. Then on top of that, we even have kind of a combination of those different levels, and then on top of that, we've got like nutrition and things. So as far as the lab is concerned, there are levels and layers, and as you get more acquainted to the things that we're doing, you're able to add more things rather than just looking at this number, this 1 second average on your screen, and if you have to hit that number every single time, there's going to be other things that you're doing. So I guess with the conversation of FTP, there's lots of different ways to test it. I think it's just important that you know that in the ballpark where you're at, you need to know where that you're training, and then kind of to go from there and to really focus on kind of the skills, your endurance in that respect, and just being able to do what you need to do during your testing. I know that was kind of a lot. I have a lot of thoughts on it, unfortunately, but if anyone has anything, I'd love to hear from you too.
I have 2 comments about that. One is for a new rider, for somebody who's just started training, the FTP increase is going to be quicker. So somebody who started in the first 2 years, let's say, of training, they're going to have more frequent increases in FTP, and that's natural. Over time, that changes. And really is what you said, Jason, it's not just about that number, right? It's nice to know that number, but what do you do with your power? When you're out there on the road, when you're out there in the race, when you're out there in a group ride, you're not just going to sit there and ride for 1 hour at your FTP.
Yeah.
The skills you need to have, the toolbox is comprised of being able to accelerate, being able to catch up, being able to rest, being able to be efficient. All of those things are things that you learn through workouts, things that these are skills to have that will make you faster, stronger, and stronger doesn't necessarily mean having a bigger FTP. And the other good point you brought, Jason, is yes, when you're inside for a season because it's winter time and you're looking at this one screen in front of you, looking at power, it's very easy to get caught up on that number. But really remember, it's about so much more than just what your FTP is.
Some really good points there.
Yeah, and I look, Jason, at a couple different things. One is if I have someone who's been off for a while, a lot of times I'll do a quick test on them just so I can dial them back into a better box for establishing their zones. But as they get stronger, I just keep bumping it up and bumping it up and bumping it up. But I don't need to keep doing retests on them because that generally is going to take away from other training. Like you mentioned, having to taper someone for a couple days just to get the best quote unquote test out of them. So yeah, I once a season, maybe twice if they just want to know, then I'll do it. But I don't really care. It doesn't mean a lot, especially in the tri world, other than where I can help set you up for your races, at least for an idea of where you can be. But we're always going to practice that anyway. So some people can't hold 85 or 90% of their FTP and then get off and run. Everyone's got a little bit different muscle composition. And then the other part of it too is as people start thinking about FTP and why it's important, they got to ask themselves, have you ever won a race because your FTP was higher than somebody else? I mean, you don't wear it on your back, so no one just goes, oh, that guy's a 7 watts higher FTP, so therefore he's going to beat me. No, you win the race because you're tactically smarter. You know, you're attacking at the right times. You're being in the right position when it's advantageous to you. So again, FTP is a number. That's all it is.
Yeah, totally. I guess a quick side note. It's funny. As a coach, have you guys ever been on a group ride and you've looked around and you kind of have an idea of like what people's FTP are and be like, "Oh, you're going way too hard." Like, don't go off the front.
But it's the same as in running. So the fitness test I had last week, as we were going through the first couple hundred meters, I heard these footsteps behind me, and I could tell the footsteps were a lot heavier than maybe a really fast runner would have. And I looked down at my watch, and we were at a 4:45 pace. And I was like, wow. As I just looked at it, I went over my shoulder. I was like, we're a little hot right now. We're doing 4:45 per mile. We should probably slow down. And then shortly thereafter, I heard,
That's funny. So before we move on, I know Andrea's got some really good stories about FTP and kind of how it can play mental tricks on you. So would you like to share that story, Andrea?
I'm quite a nervous, anxious, perfectionist type athlete, and tests terrify me. So I've had to turn them into a game of kind of, okay, just be mentally strong, focus on the now. Don't waste your energy worrying about this. How do you feel? And setting little challenges that way. Because the FTP test, it's going to get done regardless. So you might as well gain a few more strengths from it. But yeah, my FTP test failed 6 minutes in last week, and I was like, oh man. But I was actually so geared up for it and excited about it. I actually just did it again and held it.
Yeah.
So I think if we dread something, we'll almost find a way out. And if we just throw ourselves in, and no one's judging us, this is for our training. You know, it's to our benefit. Our coaches aren't going to give us a big red box of a no if there's no fail. So I guess we can try and learn something about ourselves and make it a bit of fun at the same time.
Absolutely.
You don't send out the berating emails when they don't do as well as you thought?
No, that's only about dinner.
This is true. Yeah, that's true. All right. So let's move back. With how many new riders we have in the lab, it could be people that are just getting started up with this lab too for us, for those riders that have done the pre-lab. They're kind of in the groove of things, but Taya wanted to touch a little bit about kind of coming off the bike or starting this new lab and a little bit on that. So Taya?
Yes, we do have a few athletes who asked about how to ease back into training because they have been away, be it because of a holiday, couple of weeks off the bike, or they recovered from recent illness, etc. And so jumping in and doing 5 rides in the first week or 4 or 5 rides in the first week might be too much. And so with that, it's really about looking at, and this is where the forum is a great place to comment on and say, what should I do here? I've been off the bike. But overall, I think the rule of thumb is start to ease back into it, 2 workouts, right? And then see how you feel. If you think you can squeeze a 3rd ride in, then do it. And then in the 2nd week, you'll see how you feel and start to feel a little bit better. So if you have been away from the bike for perhaps 2 or 3 weeks, but you were active during this time that you were away, you were hiking, you were skiing, you were doing some other exercise, then it shouldn't be a steep curve to get back into the groove of bike workouts. Otherwise, if you have been not so active, then starting with 2 rides the first week, as we commented on the forum, is the way to go. The other thing was, coming back from illness, jumping right in, let's say into an FTP test. One of our riders had that question. A lot of times the legs get a little bit lazy from being off the bike, and that's just losing that sharpness a little bit from not having that constant movement of it's the consistency, right? So sometimes it's not so much doing intensity work, but having consistent days on the bike that helps maintain the sharpness of the legs. And so just, the rule is you do 1 workout, you do 2 and see how you feel and see if you can up it from there. The other comment I had was about using erg mode or not using erg mode. The general advice here for the workouts is to not use erg. Stay out of erg. There's a lot of reasons for that, including the fact that your smart trainer might not be adjusting the power properly or getting there as you need to in short intervals. Use your gears, your cadence to adjust your power. Yes, the numbers are not going to look absolutely still and perfect and constant on your screen, but you can use the 3-second average on Zwift, or you can use a Garmin and have that be an average for the interval instead of looking at numbers jumping up and down. It's fine. The numbers will jump up and down a little bit. And as long as you're within that range, you're perhaps 5 watts higher, 10 watts, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, you're still within that range. All right.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I think those are really good points. No, I was just going to add to that. As we're going to have a little bit more of a conversation in the next part of this, but as you do come in the 2 workouts a week to get started, and hopefully working up to 3. A lot of times people are still riding other days, but they're trying to ride these 3 rides of intensity. And so you're going to need to balance kind of your regular race, social ride schedule, whether it be outdoors or indoors, to kind of back off on those and trade those time on the bike for these intense structured rides. So we may find riders that are doing 5 days a week, but are having trouble fitting those other rides with these 3 workouts. So kind of balance that. But if you're just going from trying to do these 3 workouts and you're not able to find that time, then backing up to just those 2 workouts could be useful. On the opposite end, if you're looking to get to the same level or amount of riding that, let's say, you were doing last year or in the last lab, or just kind of how much you normally do, we're going to talk about how you can add things to that with one of the questions. So Taya, why don't we bring that up, and then we can kind of, all the coaches can do a quick roundtable on what we think about getting more in out of the week.
Right. So it's a little bit of a twofold question that came up from one of our writers. One is, I feel like I should be improving more given the amount of time that I put in. So perhaps she's writing a lot and doing a lot of, all the workouts in the lab. And should I be, improving more? And really, what do you mean by improving? Does it mean, again, going back to the FTP point that we just discussed, right? It's having an increase in FTP is in my opinion, is not your ultimate goal. It's really, your improvement is, are you a better rider? And what are your goals really? It all depends on your goals. Are you a racer? Do you have a season to train for? Or do you want to be the person who is one of the strongest in your club ride that you do every weekend, right? So it really depends on what are you looking for? What does improvement mean to you? But then bringing in the balance of, yes, I like doing these other rides. I want to add them into what I'm doing every week. At the end of the day, we're amateur cyclists. We want to have fun. It's about the process. It's about the daily process of being on the bike and doing the things that you like to do. So it's good to incorporate some of those rides in. You don't have to give them up. But at the same time, you have to balance such that you are getting the most benefit for the work that you're putting in. And that means the type of work and the quality of your work to give you the most benefit with the least amount of, let's say, time on the bike. Because let's face it, if you're on the bike doing you do all the workouts, then you jump into these group rides that quickly turn into a workout too, because everybody's just hammering at 2.5, 3 watts per kilogram, then you're going to end up overtrained. You're going to end up feeling fatigued, and carrying that fatigue over, the quality of your workouts is going to suffer.
I have to disagree with you a little bit there, Thea, because no group ride on Zwift ever turns into a hammerfest. They're all steady. No, I agree 100%. This is one of the things I have to explain to people over and over, is that, you got to figure out what you want to do. If you want to just go out and race and have fun, okay, but don't expect any results. If you want to gain results, then you have to go out and put in the practice. So if you equate this to other sports like football, you don't see, the Patriots getting out there and not practicing and just playing a game every single day. It's 6 days of practice or 5 days of practice for 1 day of game. So you have to put everything in perspective and really try to understand what you are trying to do. And it's okay if you just want to get out on there and race and have fun and do that. That's fine too. It's just that means that's what your goal is, fun. You're not necessarily focused on making massive improvements, or you're not focused on a target race. You're just having fun, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I think speaking to a little bit of the improvement and the goals, I think that's really important for riders to identify. And the limiting factor as coaches that we find for a lot of riders is how much you could actually ride in a week. And when we evaluate those riders early on, they could ride X amount of hours per week on the bike. And if you've got your other disciplines that you need to also address, it's important to kind of balance those things and understand that quality is where you're going to get your improvements and reach your goals, versus just being on, let's say, in our case, the bike for that many hours. You're going to find that using the structure or using a workout like you're going to get through the lab is what's going to get you your improvements. And then to speak to how much work a lot of riders are doing, don't forget there is also time where you need to take off the intensity. I mean, you're going to need to step back for your body to absorb that fitness. So a lot of the periodization or the increasing or decreasing of the amount of stress that you're doing is done by us as coaches in the lab. But for riders who consistently ride their X per hours per week, they may find that they're starting to either decline or maybe plateau. And a lot of that time that has to do with they're just doing the same amount of riding that they're doing. Or if they're looking for a bigger jump, they need to rest and then maybe move up a level to maybe more stress if there is more time available. But if people are hitting their their X number, their hours per week, then really it's just about balancing all of that.
Well, that's the key point right there. You mentioned the rest, because you don't get stronger by doing really, really hard workouts. You get stronger by recovering after really hard workouts.
Exactly.
And a lot of times as coaches, our roles become not so much, to get it's easy to give people workouts to do. It's hard for us to give people rest to do, to get off the bike, to do something else, to do 15 minutes of stretching or to do some type of, recuperative thing to themselves versus having them just do workouts. So that's, pulling back is our athletes is one of the, as far as a coach, one of our skills, I feel like, and getting them to rest.
And the rest and recovery is also mental. So it's not just the physical part. It's really about checking out and having a restful day, mentally speaking. You are okay with that. You trust that that's the best thing that you're doing for your body, and you do it. And I learned it the hard way. I could not rest, right? As an athlete, when I started, for some time, I just couldn't rest. So I just had to go through the fact that I was overtrained and I wasn't improving and I was constantly fatigued to then figure out that, nope, this isn't right. I need to rest.
Yeah, excellent. Really tough things for people to kind of grasp, our athletes. And a lot of times that's why it's kind of camped out, or it's a dealt out to coaches to help them with it. Because sometimes having someone else look at what's going on can be helpful. So listen, when you get a chance, ask those questions and let us know, and we're definitely there. We're going to do a quick transition over here. We're going to slide on over to Andrea. There was some topics in the lab that had some questions about cramping. We've touched on it before, but we have a couple things that we'd like to bring up, and I'm going to pass it on over to Andrea to bring the question, or maybe let's do this. Ian, I know you are up. You've got the post up from the lab. Why don't you bring us up to speed with the question, and then Andrea can kind of follow up with what she's got for the answer.
Okay, yeah, we had one of our athletes who was talking about his long course triathlon, and when he does all his races, he comes out. He says, looking like he'd been rolled in icing or sugar due to the sweat. So he's obviously a high sweat rate individual, but he's having occasional cramping on the bike and then a lot of cramping on the run. He upped his sodium intake for his electrolytes significantly, 1,500 milligrams per hour, and which is high. And he hyperhydrated last time. And he didn't have as many of the cramping issues, but he's still asking, what do we think about that? Is that a good strategy? But I think there's more to it than that. So that's why I'll turn it over to Andrea, who's much more the expert in this than I am.
Yeah, it may be worth getting properly sweat tested by a system like Precision Hydration if you really want to answer that question, how much am I sweating in what type of conditions? But one thing that's popping up into my mind is about the cell membrane, actually, and its ability to hold our hydration. The cell membrane is what lets, sort of the gate that lets everything in and out of the cell where we want to hydrate. So looking at the quality of fats in the diet, phospholipids, which make cholesterol, and the structure of the cell membrane. So I think sometimes we've got to widen the lens. We can think about race in the context of the race, but we may also need to look at the athlete in the context of health. So a couple of things obviously to look at, which sounds like they have been looked at, is on course, our electrolytes, our hydration, our nutrition, how our stomach is managing to absorb things, our pacing, our posture, our breathing, our bike fit. all things, more in the context of racing to look at. Cramping can happen more when we have an injury or an imbalance. So this is where our strength and mobility work is really important. And sometimes as triathletes, that 30-minute strength workout, we're like, that's not really that important. It's really important. And the lab strength workouts at 30 minutes are really manageable. So I urge that, maybe having someone doing a biomechanical assessment, or looking at an osteopathic assessment just to check that everything's in alignment, that maybe when there's more force, more pace coming into it in the longer races, that an imbalance is then triggering the neuromuscular system. I know, things to look at and speak to with the coach. Looking at general food intake, making sure that in the day-to-day there's a good intake of electrolytes, especially potassium from our vegetables and some fruit. Acid-alkaline balance. Again, there's so many reasons for why we have to eat a healthy diet, but maintaining the correct acid-alkaline balance, so we have those mineral buffers in reserve within our body, is really important again. So that's from good quality diet. Like I said, the cell membrane and phospholipids, so some organ meats are good. Bone broth is really good. Micronutrients from our nuts and our seeds and our whole grains and our legumes and our lentils, all of those good foods, we need them in place all of the time. And looking at, I suppose the coaches can touch on this, the skills that we're meant to be doing on the bike and in running, so that we have good form, are going to help prevent cramping when we're under pressure, when we're racing. And our mindset, not pushing, sticking to the plan, being present in the moment. And our mental skills coach can touch on this as well. But I feel in athletes that are forcing, they're changing their posture, they're changing their breathing, and that can impact how we're getting the supply of nutrition into the muscles and how we're removing the waste from the muscles when we're competing. So yeah, it's sort of taking a step back and looking at everything. Coaches, what do you feel about the day-to-day training and how that may relate to cramping on race day?
Yeah, we were talking briefly before we started this, and I think, yes, obviously sweat rate has a lot to do with it, but I think there's a lot more people that they go a little harder than they plan or they train for. So they overcook, especially in tri, they overcook the bike, which obviously increases their sweat rate, but also just increases that muscle wear. And then later they'll blame it on nutrition as they cramp like crazy people on the run. But I think there's a holistic approach you have to take when you're looking at your nutrition, your hydration plan, and your execution plan, which is more the factor. So I think you're spot on with a lot of that they got to look at more than just that, and I think that's where people most often neglect in their execution planning.
I agree also with the holistic approach and the mindfulness. I remember reading that there is a neurological connection between cramping, with cramping. So it is also about mental stress, not just the physical.
Yeah. So having all these things that all the coaches have kind of touched upon is really important. Going from what Andrea's talking about, making sure things, outside of training, kind of the things that you're putting into the body are in line with your goals, and making sure that those are also contributing to making sure that your balance could be very important. And I guess to speak to what she had talked about at the very beginning was possibly getting tested. This group, Precision Hydration, has a great way to, one, you could either do it online, but another great way to do it is you could actually work with them to get sweat tested, and we could probably bring more information about that. And just to make sure that you're not, over on the amount, because I know the person who posted in the lab was talking about anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500, grams or units more of electrolytes, where you may not know exactly where your balance is. A lot of times people are putting more and more in, when in fact there may be another issue, and that's what the other coaches are addressing at this time. So, excellent. Go ahead. Okay. So, was there one more thing? Go ahead.
I was just going to add the way my brain thinks, I've given a massive checklist of things that it could possibly be. But an athlete will have a gut instinct about just one of those things that I mentioned. And that's where you look first. So you don't want to go and overcomplicate things, kind of run with the factors that feel like they relate to you and address those. And then the next one, because otherwise I've just created a massive mess of stress where you're going to try and do everything at once and you're probably going to cramp. So keep it simple.
Brain cramp.
Your brain cramp. So on the hinges or on the tails of keeping it simple, I'm going to send it over to Ian, and Ian has some advice on those riders that had trouble with our math tests and a couple other things. So let's hear it, Ian. Give it to us.
Oh yeah. So a math test. I thought people stressed over FTP tests. Holy cow. Apparently, when you make us super type A people get on a bike and not go really hard, that's impossible. This is one of those things that it was very difficult for everyone to understand what we were doing because they weren't having to kill themselves on this test. And all we really wanted to see was, where's your aerobic fitness sit? Because, we're coming out of a preseason and we're going into a base lab. So there's no expectation that everybody's in peak performance. Otherwise, we would be in a peak lab, not a base lab. So what we really were looking for here is, what do you have? How's your engine right now? How's the base of your engine? So what we noticed was everyone was overthinking this, saying, oh, it's only 70% of my FTP or only 75% of my FTP, which goes back to our previous conversation of why I hate the FTP and FTP test. And there's a lot of stress that was going into this, and people really concerned with what those numbers meant. And so what we really want everyone to understand is this is not an end-all be-all test, just like the FTP test. This is just an indicator of aerobic fitness. So don't overthink it. If the numbers aren't exactly what you want, that's okay. That's fine. And if you're really not sure what the test is or what we're doing, there's some good instructions that we put in there, but there's an amazing video as well that Taya put together that can help people out and really understand what we're trying to get at. And like I said, this is not one we're really wanting to go after as far as your peak output. It's just kind of looking at, what do we have in our reserves? What do we have to build off of? This is the foundation of our house, I guess is the best way to put that. And then the other part I want to cover real quick is training at low heart rate, because as we move into our multi-sport side of the house on the base lab, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be frustrated. People who are used to running at 8-minute miles every run, all run every time, are going to be dialed back to 9:30 or a 10, and it's going to just be painfully slow. And people are going to complain, because I know I did it myself, cutting back 1.5 to 2 minutes per mile. But if you can work at that lower heart rate, eventually you're going to start being able to go a little bit faster at that same heart rate. And what we're going to see is your aerobic capacity increases, and you're able later on down the road to push harder for longer without blowing up. And yes, you're going to lose a little top end speed at first, because we're not going to work on speed for a little while. But it's much easier to fine tune that speed at the end when you have this aerobic engine that can just go for days. And I've also found that when I do this, I don't necessarily need as much as far as intake on my calorie consumption, and I can stay away from some of the sugars because I'm not having to feed that real base level metabolic engine. Because if I'm working off that lower heart rate and I can go longer at that lower heart rate, then I'm using different energy sources, not just sugar. And that I've seen is those are one of the reasons we did the math test. But as we work in the multi-sport side of the house, that's the other part that I think people are going to see. And so I'm trying to preempt that conversation a little early here. And then lastly, we got for the multi-sport folks, we're doing our testing week this week. So while we just talked about all the stress that comes with testing, I don't want everyone to be stressed about this, but this is just so we can all figure out where we are zone-wise. That's all we're doing the testing for, so we can know when you're putting when you're getting your plan, it shows you your left and right limits for your efforts, and that's all we're doing the testing for. So don't stress out on that. I always tell my athletes, don't stress on the test. This test is what it is. It's a number for a day. It's just what we use as our base for our guide, and we'll tweak it as we go. But yeah, that's basically about it for that. It really wasn't a complicated test, I didn't think, but apparently it created a lot of consternation.
And I think as I've used this test kind of extensively for riders to get their mindset out of the hard, 95, 100, 5% of FTP, it allows riders to finally sometimes break that ice to get them thinking outside of something else to test to see if their levels are where they're at. So for those riders that are looking to kind of check a box, I think it's a place where it's not that stressful of a test. It's a real stress. It's a really a good place to kind of just find out kind of if you're rested, if you're recovered, and it's a ride that you could actually even use as recovery because it is essentially a zone 2 kind of test workout. So something you can kind of go to at any time, even on a recovery day, to kind of look at those numbers and just see where they are during the year. But again, if you're chasing numbers, that's probably not the direction we want you to go. So
no, and one thing I saw was people were getting up and posting in the forum about, I hit that number as I'm getting on the bike. I'm like, well, that might tell you something that your aerobic fitness isn't quite there. So even if you have some top end, it's not going to help you much on a 2-hour race.
Right. As I train a lot of short duration crit racers here in the local area, they've got everything they have to suffer because a lot of the races early on are between 20 and 40 minutes. So a lot of my younger riders are able to suffer for that long. But a lot of times their heart rates or their aerobic fitness or aerobic base is not a lot because they spend all their time doing hard stuff, hard climbs, hard chasing, hard group rides. So when I ask them to kind of either do trainer work or go out and, God forsake, don't do a group ride and get some work in, it can come very quickly because really nobody does, or they aren't doing that work to get that base in, and it's at this lower heart rate that Ian's talking about. It's this, this just below where you need to really push up. And again, it just reinforces some of the things that we're doing here in the lab. So excellent. I'm going to slide over to on the horizon what we've got coming up. And then we could talk a little bit about group workouts. But for our multi-sport, as far as what we're building kind of even outside of the lab we're in, maybe you guys can share kind of what you have in the plans there, Ian.
Yeah, Jason. So we've had a couple requests for this because us triathletes have odd seasons. We don't necessarily conform to your strict cycling seasons. And so what we're putting together is after the base lab, we're going to have a 12-week build peak plan for those who are working an event this summer, but it's going to be something we're going to have available for later on for someone who might have something small, maybe a B or C race early, and then have their A race later on. So we're gonna put that together and be able to use that later on through the lab as well. And like I said, the idea is to be able to grab that at any point after people have built their base, and we can jump them right into a prep for their A race. Now this one is initially going to be focused on long course, so we're talking half Ironman distance, maybe a little longer, but that not necessarily focused on iron distance. But we're also going to work on building more of a short course, the Olympic distance, sprint distance, which obviously that would have a little more intensity to it because it's shorter course, shorter duration effort. So we're going to have some of that put together, and I think that's going to be wildly beneficial for our multi-sport folks as they start planning out their seasons and figure out how many races they can jump into and when they want to target for their peak.
It's definitely an exciting time coming up, and ability to start a lab at a time that maybe that the whole group is doing. I think it's something that both the lab and the lab riders that are looking for that are looking forward to. So in the group module, the module we're talking about is in the Zwift module. That is, for those that are riding on Zwift, we do have a couple workouts available this week. They are in our time zones that we normally ride and lead at, which is Tuesday mornings at 5:30 Eastern. We'll be doing SST Pyramids. That's coming up next week. That's with Mitch Dingerman. On Thursday, there is a 5:15 and we're going to be there. They we'll be doing the SST variation. That's with Ian and Stefan. And then on Thursday, noontime Eastern, Teo will be doing SST pyramids as well. And on Sunday, we do. There is a group workout if you're looking for something to mix it up. Our riders from Australia, Michelle and Phil Crick, will be doing shorter intervals if you're looking for a short sprint or something like that. They do a really good mix of a couple different things if you're just looking to mix it up. And that's all in the group workout module for this coming week. One thing that we do want to touch on is that there are a couple resources we want to make sure that you're taking use of. We don't use too much of the Endurance Lab Facebook. We use them for a couple things to highlight maybe some live streams and that sort of thing. But majority of your content is going to be coming from the Endurance Lab forum. And that's where the questions and the coaches are daily to be able to answer your questions. Videos, information like the Coach's Corner will all be here and will be distributed from there. But another place that you can go is one, the YouTube channel. You can go there, search the Endurance Lab in YouTube, and you'll be able to find our channel there. And the videos are available there. So definitely click subscribe. And then the second place to subscribe is actually to the podcast. And so you can go to your local podcast reader. That would be like Google Play, iTunes, whatever you like, and search the Endurance Lab as well. And you'll find not just the Coach's Corner, but you'll find In the Feed Zone, Chat and Chill, and What's Up with Power. So you're going to get a host of shows in that podcast channel that will kind of fill your day really with the things that we hear here on Zwift Live as well as in the Endurance Lab. So with that, we'll kind of wrap up just a bit. Any last comments from the coaches? We can go from there.
I will just comment that this week there are 2 Zone 2 rides in the schedule. Pay attention to the description of those, as we have a bit of a cadence drill baked in there just to make it efficient, so you can work on that. And then the 3 workouts that you'll see.
Yeah, layers of the onion. That's what we're gonna call them. So all right. So we're hoping all the riders have a great week this week. I know that I'm actually going to be seeing Ian later today, and we are hosting a training ride here in California, going to the mountains. I don't know if Ian brought enough clothes for it, but we'll see. It should be a fun time. We're going to be doing a live stream from the beginning of the ride at the coffee shop, so we'll hopefully see everybody there and hopefully have some fun photos. But other than that, we'll see everyone in the lab, and again, use those resources. They're there for you. The coaches are here for you, and we will see everyone next week in the Coach's Corner.